the man who held a silence in his hands. There's a number no other infantryman in the entire war had to live with quite this way. 1 to 2 seconds. That's the time between the moment he pulled the trigger and the moment the 40mm grenade reached whatever it was flying toward. A rifle never gave him that gap. Pull the trigger, and the consequence arrives in the same instant. No space for awareness to slip in between cause and effect. The M79 did. In that 1 to 2 seconds, the round flew slow enough for his eyes to track its arc through the air, and in that exact window, his brain had time to register that he had just put something into motion that couldn't be called back, something that was going to land on someone, and that the outcome was already decided before it ever hit the ground. He was the grenadier, the man who carried the grenade launcher, known by half a dozen nicknames, the thumper, the blooper, but none of those names capture the thing that actually defined his job. He was the only soldier in the entire squad, forced to watch himself kill someone, literally, every time he pulled the trigger. Before talking about the man, one misunderstanding about the weapon itself needs fixing. People tend to think of the M79 as just another powerful weapon bolted onto the infantry's arsenal. The truth runs the other way. It was built to close a deadly gap the Army had known about since Korea, but failed to fix for years. A hand grenade could be thrown maybe 35 meters. The lightest mortar in the inventory couldn't fire closer than 300. Between those two numbers sat a dead zone, over 260 meters wide, where a squad had no explosive option at all, and the only way to deal with a target inside it was to send a man crawling close enough to throw a frag, and hope whoever was waiting on the other end didn't shoot first. The Army recorded nearly 40% of engagements in rough terrain, falling inside that exact gap. The M79 wasn't an offensive upgrade. It was a patch for a hole that had already gotten men killed across 3 previous wars. But the price of patching that hole was a trade no one explained clearly when they handed over the weapon. Whoever was chosen to carry the M79 had to give up his M16. That was the condition, not a choice. In return, he received a .45 pistol with 7 rounds as his only means of self-defense, in a war where contact routinely happened at ranges that made a pistol nearly useless against an opponent's automatic rifle. That's the paradox sitting at the center of this job. He was the single most lethal man in the squad at range, and the weakest man in the squad to defend himself up close. And up close was exactly where the jungles of Vietnam forced most contact to happen. Worse, his most powerful weapon had a dead zone of its own. The M406 high-explosive round needed somewhere between 14 and 30 meters of flight before spin from the barrel's rifling released the fuse's safety mechanism. Fired any closer than that, the round just struck like a half-pound rock. No explosion. In jungle terrain, where first contact routinely happened around 15 meters, the most powerful weapon in the squad turned useless at the exact moment it was needed most, and he had to stand there knowing that, with a 7-round pistol as the only thing left. The other side understood his value well enough to make him their top priority target. Documents captured from North Vietnamese forces showed specific instructions in some units. In an ambush, target the grenade launcher first. This wasn't because he was the most dangerous man at range. He was. But for the opposite reason. Killing him first, or forcing him back before he could fire, erased the squad's entire explosive capability in that instant, leaving only rifle against rifle, a fight numbers usually decided. Killing the grenadier wasn't an act of cruelty or revenge. It was cold tactical math. Remove exactly 1 man to neutralize an entire group's disproportionate firepower. 2 stories belong side by side here. because they show two different faces of the same weapon. In 1969, near the Saigon River, a four-man recon team was surrounded, out of rifle ammunition. The team's grenadier started firing, no longer at specific targets. He was building a wall of explosions around their position, firing dozens of rounds in minutes. Each one, a 1 to 2 second silence he had to sit through before the blast confirmed he was still far enough away to live. He bought every second by repeatedly walking through that exact moment, again and again, with no time for one silence to end before the next began. A gunship pilot landed an attack helicopter in the middle of the firefight to pull all four men out, and later received the Medal of Honor for it. But that rescue never happens without the grenade launcher firing continuously, round after round, buying each second at a psychological cost only the man pulling the trigger ever understood. A different story runs the opposite direction. Another grenadier, in contact too close for the round to arm, fired at an enemy soldier directly in front of him. The round struck a bamboo stalk before it could arm, ricocheted, and hit his own squad leader. No one died, but the wound was bad enough to send the man home early. 20 years later, the grenadier tracked down his former squad leader for the sole purpose of apologizing in person for something that wasn't his fault at all. He had done everything exactly as trained, and a fuse design decided the rest. He carried that apology for 20 years over a mistake that was never his, because the 1 to 2 second gap, however it ends, always gets counted as the responsibility of the man who pulled the trigger. Here's the part hero stories never tell completely. A rifleman fires at a shape in the jungle and rarely learns the outcome. A grenadier was different. He heard it. The screaming, the silence after, sometimes a secondary explosion confirming something else had gone off too. He never saw a face, but he heard enough to know exactly what he had just done, and the psychological distance other weapons offered. No sight, no knowledge, no direct confrontation, never fully existed for him. Some veterans say that years later, a car door closing wrong, a sound on a construction site, a box dropped on a floor, could pull them back, not to the explosion itself, but to the silence right before it, that 1 to 2 second window where they already knew what they'd done before it actually happened. And at the end, the simplest weapon of the war placed the most complicated job on the man who carried it. The Army eventually built an underbarrel version, so soldiers wouldn't have to give up their rifle, and most units switched over. But Special Operations kept the old one, cut the barrel down, added a pistol grip, carried it on the hip like a surprise close-quarters weapon, because the range was longer, the accuracy sharper, and the men who needed the best kept choosing the weapon everyone else had already left behind. The weapon itself was nothing but a folding metal tube, a 40mm bore, a trigger. The complicated part was never the weapon. It was the man who carried it, the one who traded his rifle for 50 pounds of explosives strapped to his chest, who walked point, knowing he was the top priority target,